Asia Tech Podcast with Graham Brown and Michael Waits.
Look, this is Michael Waits from Asia Tech Podcast Stories, and I'm talking to Sunhera Cariappa, who's the founder of the Ultimate Toolkit. I cannot believe, actually, hello, by the way, I cannot believe that name was not already taken.
I know. I did hesitate for a second, but there is actually a website called the Ultimate Toolkit, and it's a really boring sales toolkit. And it's got, it's one of those, 90s with, a middle-aged man standing holding the toolkit in his hand, saying, "This is why you should buy this book." So I do get that a lot. I have a few customers going to the wrong website and saying, "When did you change to a middle-aged man?"
I was going to say, there's nothing worse than a middle-aged man as your logo or as your mascot.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
I can't tell if I'm laughing because that's really funny or it's just really late. But either way, it's really good.
Or is the beer, maybe?
It's not I don't drink, so it can't be the beer. You know what I mean?
Okay.
But don't feel like you have to apologize. So what is the Ultimate Toolkit? And that's not the only thing that there is about you. That's just the first thing that kind of pops up, I guess, that everybody wants to know about. But what exactly is it, and how does it work, and how does it fit into everything else that you do? Because you do a bunch of things, right?
Right, absolutely. So the Ultimate Toolkit is basically a toolkit that helps you conduct design thinking workshops on social issues. So the first issue I focused on is gender sensitization. And so what this toolkit does is take you through the exercises and the entire workshop. So it's meant to be a DIY toolkit. I do get questioned a lot to say, why have you named it the Ultimate? It feels a bit final, but it's. I did Google the term Ultimate because I got a lot of questions. But it is the best possible solution for a problem, and in this case, it's design thinking. So that's my analogy behind that.
Yeah, I mean, in my mind, ultimate in this case never seemed to me to mean end. It just meant the best.
Yeah, absolutely.
No?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I am not disagreeing with that. But yeah.
And can you tell me what design thinking is in your mind?
So design thinking is, just a mindset that allows you to use a human-centered approach to a problem. So it's from a user's perspective. So you focus deeply on solutions, empathizing with the user. And that's just what it is. It's as simple as that. How do you empathize with your user?
Okay, and can you tell me why you chose your first topic? Because this is something that's really close to me, and I just want to find out why. Because there's so much more to talk about on this topic, but I want to find out why you went there first.
Absolutely. I've always, being from India, I'm not new to this issue, and, you hear it so often that somewhere you desensitize yourself as well.
Right.
But it was only when I was doing my master's in Hong Kong that one of my professors suggested I look into this issue of, sexual harassment, gender inequality, and try and use design to solve it. My first reaction was, really, Hong Kong? I really wouldn't think this exists here. But I did start researching and, interviewed a few professors and friends and realized the problem was very much existing in workplaces especially, but people weren't talking about it. And so it started from there. And as I continued my research, the numbers were there. 1 in 5 women in Hong Kong, 1 in 3 women in Japan, 2 in 3 women in UK. It's more 2 in 10 men in Australia. So it's definitely a global issue. And I wanted to do something different for it.
So can you tell me a little bit about how your first cut at this, how the Ultimate Toolkit attempts to sort of do a DIY to Solve is a really tricky word in my mind for this type of problem, right? It's just to help sort of disintermediate it. I don't even know what the right thing to say is.
Absolutely.
But how does that work?
I'll start with the two problems here. So the first problem, of course, being the actual issue of gender harassment and gender inequality. But the second being the services that are existing to tackle this problem. And I realized that they were really, really crappy. Globally, very few organizations provide gender sensitization training. And if it's done, it's mostly in-house through a really boring presentation, which is a one-sided conversation, or it's on the internet through a boring video or an animation or e-module. I'm sure you may have experienced that at some point. I have. But at the end of the day, your employees are not going back with any learning. They're not going back with any empathy. And this was where the idea came up. I'm trying to disrupt this model and make it a really interactive workshop to get to not make it a one-sided conversation, to get everyone in the organization involved.
Right, but so this is I think one of the biggest words you're using here is empathy. It's really important, actually. So how do you get somebody to empathize with somebody else?
So how that can happen is through usually interviewing or being in the person's shoes, empathizing through their journey, as you may say. And so that's exactly what I've done in this toolkit. I take them through a journey of harassment. So right from, where it's happening, who is the harasser, what are the problems that the victim's facing, who's the victim. I take them through different scenarios and get them to, open quotes here, empathize. And once they do that, they come out really understanding the problem and then are more able to say, okay, this is what needs to change with this framework, or this is what needs to change with our policy.
And how do you measure your effectiveness?
So this is a bit tricky because it gets a bit political when you go into companies.
Sure, very. I could imagine very.
Very, absolutely. Yeah, it's right from the beginning to the end. So, the HR would obviously have their own conditions. So it's very tricky to measure the success of this. But if I come away from the workshop getting really good feedback from the participants, that's great for me. For example, there was a workshop I conducted recently with the design studio, at the end of the workshop, they're supposed to come up and brainstorm with solutions. And so and they can be crazy solutions because that's how design thinking works. You focus on brainstorming ideas, and they can be as crazy as you want it to be. And so one of the ideas was, we should have a code word in our office like zucchini, something that only our team knows. And so if, something's happening or we see something that we don't like, we can just say zucchini and, the other person would find out.
Right.
And I found out a week later that they had actually used this word in a real life situation when they were at a meeting. And, one of the girls' buttons had opened or something like that. And, her teammate said zucchini. And so she looked around and realized what had happened. And that's in its own way, a really, really nice, delightful way to measure the success of this workshop.
Right, fair enough. You can actually see it in practice. But is it interesting, and again, I may say the wrong thing, but just tell me where I'm wrong. It seems to me like if you're looking at the workplace, so external recruiters tend to be men. Right, so executive recruiters tend to be men, predominantly, not always, but predominantly, right? And yet human resources departments internally tend to be staffed by women.
Right.
It seems to me. So for you, you have this challenge of, when someone gets hired, right, they're hired by a man, and men tend to generally sort of default to hiring other men. And yet when they get service from internal, that service generally comes from female employees. And I'm
Right.
generalizing, right, to make a point, but I think the point is valid. So it's interesting to me that, like, you're playing against this dichotomy of when the person gets hired, they get hired kind of into one environment, and then they get handled by someone in another environment. I just think that, sexual harassment seems to be, and sort of, and gender inequality, clearly, I think I'm stating the obvious, tends to be a uniquely female problem, right? And while there are men that have this problem, like you said, 2 out of 10 in Australia, that's a problem, right? 20%
Right.
is 20% too many.
Absolutely.
For sure. But if it's 2 out of 3 in the UK of women that have a sexual harassment problem, that's like 66.666%. That's, 3 times higher. It's just way too many.
Right, absolutely.
Right.
But let's keep one thing in mind, which is there are women who are coming out with these instances, and not men. So there are probably a whole demographic of men that we haven't counted in because they're not coming out with their problems. When I've done these workshops, you won't believe that most often men say that they've been bullied in their childhood or they've been harassed in their childhood more than women. So it's definitely, I think it's definitely changing. The scope and the landscape of how we see this is I think changing for the good. Where women and men are both sharing the space of being harassed.
Yeah, look, I think it's a fair statement to say that men are probably more harassed when they are younger.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I think and again, it's just me, right? But I think the kind of harassment that a woman faces, particularly in the workplace, is just really unique in the way it encompasses, power dynamics, hiring mechanisms, promotion mechanisms. And I think in that sense, that's more of a female issue. I don't want to say problem because it's not a female problem. It's more a male problem. But still, I think it's more perpetrated on women than it is on men, to be fair.
No, absolutely. It's a very deep-rooted issue if you look at it. It's been happening for decades, and for now, a man to lose his job because of a woman, which we've seen recently, is amazing. And I'm sorry to say for the man, but this wouldn't have happened a decade ago.
No, look, in my mind, that's a good thing, not a bad thing, right?
Absolutely. I do agree what you say. It's a very deep-rooted issue of how women are seen differently to men. But I'm hoping this would definitely change.
So look, this is very topical for me in the context of the startup world, particularly in the tech startup world, and particularly in the venture capital tech startup world, right? And I don't know if you feel comfortable giving your opinion on this, but frankly, doing what you're doing, this should be like right in your wheelhouse, right?
Right.
So I can't remember if it's a month ago now or 2 months ago, but the founder and the head of 500 Startups, a guy named Dave McClure, followed in the footsteps of a couple of other VCs that had been, what's the right word? Accused and outed of, sexual harassment in a way that really impacted the business, right? Right. I think if a man or if a woman walks up to someone of the opposite sex or someone of the attractive sex, whatever your biases may be, if they walk up to somebody in a social environment where the rules are kind of known, like you're in a bar or whatever, there are some rules that people know, and I'm not gonna make a value judgment about what those rules are. But you also know what the rules are in the workplace, and I think those rules are pretty well defined. I'm just curious as to your opinion of what happened there, whether it's okay for someone just to publish sort of a glib apology letter and say, I was being, and excuse my language please, but I was being a little bit of an ass and a little bit of a dick, but maybe I shouldn't have done that, but that kind of apology to me doesn't seem to carry much weight. And I'm just curious as to your opinion, and maybe in your circles you have had conversations with other men and women who've said to you, it's fine, or oh my god, that's insane. I'm just curious what the feedback is that you've been getting and what your opinion is on that.
Right, absolutely. I completely agree with what you said. There's there's definitely a gray line as to what's acceptable and what's not, and it goes down to different reasons, upbringing. There's education. There's interaction with the opposite sex over the years, and also respect for the opposite sex. So there are many factors that do play in. But you have to be mindful that in a company where you're working side by side with women, you have to be extra careful as to what you say around people. And I think that kind of just disappears for some people, for some men, and that is what the problem is. So definitely not. An apology letter is not going to cut it. I don't think so.
I don't think so either. Look, there is a concept that circulates that the world is becoming too politically correct.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you chuckled. So I have a view on this as well, and I feel like I don't think being polite has anything to do with political correctness. And I think your parents teach you when you're a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old that there's a time and a place for most things. I wouldn't even say for everything. And there's no time and no place for some things. Mm-hmm. And I don't think it has anything to do with political correctness. But I'm curious if you go through this in your DIY kit and just kind of run through some of these scenarios. So I wanted to talk a little bit about scenarios as well, because you reminded me of two things that I've seen in the past.
Right.
So one was a undercover policeman from Newark, New Jersey, or Trenton, I can't remember where, and his name was David Toma. And David used to do a program for sort of underserved youth, right, and underprivileged youth, and he called that program Scared Straight. So he would say to them, if you want to live a life of crime, that's fine, but just come with me for a week into jail. And let me scare you into becoming not a criminal, but into becoming like straight. Not meaning straight in a, in a sexual way, but just straight like someone who doesn't commit crimes, yeah?
Right.
And that sounds like kind of what you're saying, right? You do role playing, right? And you kind of show people in real time what it feels like to be harassed. Right. Right. And the second, just trying to remember, the second was, so a couple of guys did an experiment, I believe, and I'm just remembering, I'm doing this from memory. But what they did was in a mall, or in a few malls, what they would do is they'd ride up the escalator, and if a man had his hand on the other side of the escalator, they'd just sort of caress his hand as it went by.
Right. I think I've seen this one.
I'm sure you have. Right. So this is a great way to show like just how infuriating it is.
It is, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
For someone to approach you either physically or emotionally in a way that makes you really uncomfortable.
Right.
So I'm just curious what types of things you do in that DIY kit. If you can explain it in slightly more detail without giving away the secrets, right? I'm just curious how that works.
Right. There are great examples that you just used. It's definitely, that's exactly what empathy is. So you put yourself in, the victim's position. And so these scenarios that I'm building are mainly around the harassers. So you have different profiles of harassers, like someone who uses his position as a power position. Someone who is a guardian but actually has wrong intentions. A mother-father figure, you may say. There are these different sort of personas of harassers that I map out, and I ask the participants to visualize that if you were the harasser, what are the types of victims you would target? What locations would you target them at, and how would you target them? And so this takes them through a journey of saying, okay, it would definitely be an intern that's, harassed by someone like a boss. Or where would this happen? It would happen in his office. It could happen at an offsite, on the plane maybe when they're on a flight. So these are like little details that they are supposed to look through. And that's basically how it takes place. But once they go through a pattern, I get them to then move to the next phase, which is coming up with solutions.
And do you learn things as well when you go through this process? I'm curious as to what types of solutions people come up with for these problems.
Definitely, I think each workshop is definitely a great learning experience. It tells you, what their expectations are, what they hope to learn out of this, but also, where's their level of understanding in terms of, harassment or gender bias? What do they understand when we say that? A lot of people say, "Oh, is pinching harassment? Is staring at someone harassment? Is showing pornography harassment?" So these are blurred lines,
yes,
that you may say, and my workshop really helps to kind of define those lines. There's they can differentiate between flirting, say, and insisting on a date. So definitely there are some very, very cool ideas that come out. Some of the ideas have been, let's have a secret box in our office. So if someone is uncomfortable or feeling something, they could go in anonymously, put in something, and we need to review those comments every week or every month. So I think there are some ideas like this that come out, which I always coax them to see through or kind of take into reality.
Right. I mean, you've really chosen a polarizing topic for your first addition to the toolkit.
Thank you.
No, you have. I mean, and good for you actually for tackling something that it's kind of intractable in a way, right? I mean, it's never actually going to go away. It's been around forever, but the more work we do on it, I always like to say, like, nothing good happens in the dark, right?
Yeah.
And just giving something, shining a light on something in and of itself is a positive result. So good for you for
absolutely.
doing that.
I truly believe in the design can solve anything attitude that needs to be adopted. We live in a generation which no longer responds to traditional systems or presentations or sermons, and instead, there is a need of interaction and design in the various societal sectors, and that's where this comes from.
I think that's a really interesting concept, actually. So, just this whole notion, right, that people no longer react to the traditional ways of being told, like, what's right and wrong. I mean, because if you're really focusing on, collaboration between individuals, right, and social change, which is really what the ultimate toolkit's all about, if that's the case, it actually may mean that using design thinking is the best way, or maybe the only way, to solve some of these social issues.
Yeah, you could definitely say that. I'm definitely biased towards it, so I would say yes. But I'm keen to know what other ways are there. The end goal being solving challenges.
But what are some of the other social issues that are important to you? And then how do you expect to affect social change with them as well? In other words, are you starting to build other toolkits?
Right. That's a really good question. The idea for me was to have different volumes of the Ultimate Toolkit. So this was our first volume. And what I envision is that we take this issue to a younger audience. So there would be schools and colleges. I think this issue starts from a very young age. And not just, harassment, there's bullying as well. So I think those issues would be the next volumes. And I want to focus on gender as of now, because I think this is a very deep-rooted issue. There's a lot to be done with different audiences as well. So that's it for now.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's super topical, right? I guess another question for me is, where are you focusing on a certain geographical location? Just because you are running a business, in the end, you are hoping to build this into something that people pay for, I'm presuming, yes?
Right, absolutely.
So how does that work? In other words, how do you monetize this, and how do you make money? I mean, it's a weird question to ask in the context of what you're doing, but still, it takes resources to do it, and to continue to do it, you're going to have to get paid, right? So how do you do that? What's the business model?
Absolutely. We are running on two three kinds of business models actually. So one is, of course, we conduct workshops for companies, and they would pay us for doing that. But there's also by selling the toolkit online or physically, so that they can conduct it themselves. But there's also a train the trainer program that we're going to start with. So there's a lot of HR that comes to us, which who don't want to take the entire workshop and always want to customize it.
Right.
And sorry?
I said correct.
Right. So and this comes again, in terms of their policy and their legal framework and how much can they protect their employees and how much are they promising and not. So I do understand that's definitely a need that's been very, very that's come out to me, and I want to take that into consideration as well. So these are the three basic revenue models. But having said that, it's definitely not easy selling something like this, because the toolkit is a novel product. There is no similar product. There are similar products doing design thinking toolkits, solving other issues and helping you take through other problems. But in terms of gender sensitization, I haven't come across any other product. So there definitely is a bit of convincing that goes on before we can get a contract ready.
How big is your team, if you don't mind me asking?
So we're 3 members in my team. We're quite small.
Yeah.
And as of now, we've been targeting co-working spaces in Hong Kong. That's a great way of getting a lot of organizations involved in one sitting, but also conducting mixed workshops. So in terms of getting one company to do a workshop, I've realized that it's very seasonal. They only have one time in the year where they would do this. And in those times, they would have a contract with an e-module or a web-based modules. So that comes down to scalability as well.
Right.
There's definitely been quite a few learning milestones for me where, maybe going online would be the next step, so as to reach these companies who have more than 1,000 employees. But whilst retaining the interactive factor. That's what's in the pipeline.
I have an idea for you.
What's that?
I think you should do a podcast about this.
Really?
But I think you should do it on a regular basis, not just like every now and then, right? I know you go out and you talk to people about it, but what you really should do is you should be me, you should moderate, and you should get a conversation going with people not just locally or regionally, but globally.
Right.
And have them talk to you about issues, solutions, ideas,
right.
events that are happening globally, because this is a way to make yourself, besides being able to have an incredible amount of social impact and social change impact, it also sets you apart as an expert and someone who's just committed to getting something done in a particular space. And I found that to be really powerful. Yeah. Here's another thought that I have as well. And this is maybe something that you do include in the toolkit, or maybe you don't, but maybe you could think about doing. And I don't know. I'm not always right. I'm generally wrong. But I think in an age right now, like where you say where most people are not reacting to the traditional way of, like you said, being sermoned or preached to or told what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
I also think you're seeing a sea change and a secular change in the way people work and the types of companies in which they work. What does that mean? I think what it means is that more and more people are going to move from working out of a large corporation that has a really sort of well-embedded human resources style infrastructure where they can run programs like this to small companies like yours and like mine. And I think one of the best things you can do is you can build in, and I'll say gender diversity, but what I really mean is diversity writ large. I think you build it into your company from day one. So if you're going to look for a business partner, you just look for the best business partner, right? And if you're a woman and you're starting this with your friend, and she happens to be a woman, good stuff. If your friend happens to be a man, then that's fine as well. But every time you go to hire somebody for a new position, I think you owe it to yourself, and this is not just me talking to you. This is me talking to anybody that's listening. I think you owe it to yourself to build in diversity from day one, because I don't think it's something that can be bolted on later.
Yep, absolutely. In fact, one of the key things that we focus on is helping companies make their own policies. A lot of startups and medium-sized companies don't have one, and don't see the importance of having one. And what we say is that with this ever-changing scope and landscape of teams and work cultures, it's important to get your employees involved in this policy-making process. Why are HR and lawyers in charge of this? Get your employees to tell you what's okay and what's not okay in the workplace.
Right. I mean, you've just made a killer point, by the way.
Yeah.
Sorry, please go ahead. I interrupt, but I just wanted to be explicit about that. Like, that is so important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But, again, I don't know if we've reached that point as yet, where startups will see the importance of this. It's only, when they move past, their manufacturing nightmares and their pitching and investing, and then they start thinking of the team. But, thinking of your team should be from day one. And that is something that definitely needs to change.
Right. I mean, look, I have a non-standard view of what's happened at Uber. And remember, I know nothing about it. I don't know any of the principles. I'm sure you've heard of Uber as a company, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, people ask questions like, why didn't they have, an infrastructure inside their human resources department to be able to handle gender issues? And my feeling on this is that, sure, they should have. And without a question, they should have. But the reality is that most startups are more concerned with just hiring. And for a company that's growing as fast as Uber, they're just concerned about hiring. I need 15 more people. I need some people in Germany. I need some people in South Africa. I need some people in whatever it is. Hire.
Very true. Yeah.
And it's not an excuse, right? I don't make excuses. I just want to point out some facts, right? And again, I'm not an investor. I don't have any inside information. And I kind of don't care about that company in particular. I'm just saying it's a good way of making an example and saying, if you're going to build a company and you want to build it for super growth, make sure you build in that diversity at the beginning, because it's impossible to bolt it on later. That's kind of the only point I wanted to make.
Very true. Very true. I completely agree with that.
So, I really want to make sure that we continue to follow up with you and to find out what other toolkits you build, particularly in this space. So I'm hoping that this won't be the last time that we talk to each other. I'm sure.
I hope not, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that you'll be on other podcasts as well, but I'm hoping that you'll come back here and just continue to talk with us so we can, again, just give you the necessary platform and exposure to be able to continue to talk about these issues, particularly as it relates to startups and, overall diversity, but also gender diversity, because it's something that's really close to me and I think is really important. So,
no, definitely. Thank you so much for this, and I really enjoyed myself chatting with you.
I hope so. So I just want to thank you, Sunhera Cariappa, the founder of the Ultimate Toolkit, working with design thinking, using design thinking to impact and affect social change. I think it's really important. Anyway, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
You've been listening to Asia Tech Podcast. Find out more at www.asiatechpodcast.com.